The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are and what time zone you're in. Welcome to the webinar called Reverse Transfer, the Tennessee Experience. My name is Jason Taylor. I'm an OCCRL faculty affiliate and an assistant professor at the University of Utah. Before we begin, just a few logistical items. First, we will be recording this webinar, and we will disseminate it, post it online, and disseminate it afterward. During the webinar, if you have any technical questions or issues, please send your comments in the question box, and we'll try to respond as promptly as possible. Finally, we're saving about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the webinar for questions. So throughout the webinar, please submit your questions, your written questions, in the chat box, and we will have time to address those questions at the end of the webinar. So your hosts for today are myself and Deborah Bragg, who's the Gammell Endowed Professor and Founding Director of OCCRL. And we're very pleased to have our colleagues from Tennessee join us on this webinar and featured in this webinar. So before we launch into the main content of the webinar, we wanted to provide a little bit of background on this webinar series and the Credit When It's Due initiative. Many of you are probably familiar with the Credit When It's Due initiative, but we're now in the third year of the initiative, and we're launching a webinar series really to highlight some of the work that the now 16 states that has been funded by the Credit When It's Due initiative have been working on over the last few years. So there's a lot of information that has already been disseminated at national meetings or at the convenings or on the OCCRL website. But we are launching this webinar series as a forum to sort of go a little bit deeper into particular state experiences. And so this is the first of several webinars. We have another one scheduled next month, which we'll share that date and information with you at the end of this webinar. And we're working to schedule a few more webinars during the academic year. So we're pleased that you all can join us and to feature Tennessee today. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Bragg, who is going to provide a little bit of background information on the Credit When It's Due initiative.
Thanks, Jason. I too am really pleased about the webinar series. It's going to feature some of the states that are involved in Credit When It's Due and provide that detail that other states may need if they're considering launching a similar initiative. As Jason mentioned, the Credit When It's Due initiative started in fall 2012. It started with 12 states and has grown now to 16 states, and many other states, as we'll show you in a moment, are launching initiatives outside of the Credit When It's Due grant program. To define what we mean by Credit When It's Due, we are talking about partnerships between community colleges and universities that award associate degrees to transfer students who complete their associate degree requirements while pursuing a bachelor's degree. And typically these are degrees that are awarded once the student has already transferred to the baccalaureate institution, but for one reason or another, and there are many reasons that students do not initially obtain their associate degree, but eventually do complete the requirements for that credential and seek to obtain that credential. And these initiatives facilitate that sort of approach, which is called reverse transfer. I do want to give credit to the funders of Credit When It's Due. I think that's really important, and the funders collaborative has grown over these 3 years. So the Lumina Foundation really spearheaded this work along with the Kresge Foundation And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that I want to give a shout out to is the funder of OCCRL's research in this area. Additional funders of the state grants are the USA Funds, the Helios Education Foundation, and the Greater Texas Foundation. So it's quite a group of funders that have found this work to be pretty interesting. Next slide. So this map shows you the current status of credit when it's due, both in terms of the states, the 16 states that we identify as credit when it's due states are those states in red. Those states have almost 500 institutions involved in the initiative, so a lot of community colleges and four-year institutions. This slide also gives you an idea of how many degrees have been awarded, and we saw over a doubling of the number of reverse transfer degrees between the spring of 2014 and the summer of 2015. Our research and data collection has not ended, though, and we are continuing to secure the information from states about how many degrees they're awarding, and we will continue to update this. This slide also shows that a number of states have legislation that encourages or promotes or supports reverse transfer, and those are states that are not necessarily part of credit when it's due. So that's an interesting phenomenon as well. So I think I'll just leave it there. The states that have not been part of credit when it's due are really advancing in at various stages. So that's important to see as well. Next slide.
Great. Well, thank you, Deborah. And at this point, we are going to turn it over to our colleagues from Tennessee, and I have the pleasure of introducing them. The first is Gloria Gammell, who is the project coordinator and program manager of the Office of Academic Affairs and Student Success at the University of Tennessee. India Lane is the assistant vice president for the Office of Academic Affairs and Student Success at the University of Tennessee. And Tammy is the director of the Center for Business and Economic Research at the University of Tennessee, which is home to the state's longitudinal data system. So with that, I'll turn it over to India Lane, who is going to kick off the slides for Tennessee.
Thanks, Jason. We really are excited about this opportunity to kick off the series and to share our experience, and especially to learn from other states and other folks involved. We're also probably even more excited to have the first year of degree awards behind us at this point. Next slide, Jason. The three of us that you'll hear today are only part of a larger team that's been put together to work on this project and keep it moving, week in and week out. Some of these folks are on the call and can answer specific questions if those questions are in their bailiwick. Next slide. For the webinar today, I'm going to start with just a little bit of background and an overview of the context for reverse transfer in Tennessee, and then Gloria and Tammy will walk us through the process, the outcomes so far, and what we've learned so far. Next slide. The background story kind of starts about 3 years ago, and like other states, Tennessee had been looking hard for all kinds of ways to incentivize and encourage college completion. The Complete College Tennessee Act had been passed in 2010, and by 2012, the lawmakers had already started some conversations about reverse transfer as another route to college degrees and college completion, especially for early transfer students at that point. Because Tennessee is a performance-funded state, the systems, the higher ed systems and the institutions definitely paid attention. Anything that's going to increase degree awards and degree award numbers initially was seen as good for both the student and for the institution. Although the process and the reverse transfer policy wasn't mandated by legislation, it was strongly encouraged, and we generally also know what that means in the higher ed landscape. It means strongly encouraged, or else we will mandate it or we will legislate it. So we took notice of that. I was fortunate to be able to tag along with Nathan James, who was working with the Senate Education Committee at the time, to Maryland, where the reverse transfer process had been in place already for at least a few years at the time. We met with Terry Hollander, and we actually brought her back to Tennessee to speak to a newly formed reverse transfer task force in that same year. We learned a lot from them. Things moved a little slowly after that. Nathan, or excuse me, Jason, you can shift to the next slide. But that wasn't such a bad thing because we had time for that task force to work on policy decisions. The task force met several times and engaged in a policy document that came to a lot of critical decisions. So it was a real advantage to us to have that policy in place when funding came through. Nathan and the governor's office helped, and our Higher Education Commission helped us with initially a one-time appropriation, and Lumina and partners helped out a great deal, of course, with a credit when it's due grant shortly after that. We chose to issue a competitive RFP and granted the bid to Academy One to help us build the solution. And I'm leaving out an awful lot of steps, but we ended up not too long afterwards, just this past spring, issuing almost 350 degree awards. Next slide. I do want to highlight one more critical decision point that came in this early process before handing it over to Gloria to tell you the real story and the details. And that is that early on we decided to take a statewide approach. The statewide approach has made it easier rather than harder to implement reverse transfer in Tennessee. And that may sound counterintuitive because we're bringing in 22 public institutions and eventually close to 40 private institutions, but having everyone on the same page working together at the same time has ended up being invaluable. Now there are exceptions to the fact that it was easier rather than harder, and that is that Tennessee is a long state. You can see it from the outline here, which means a lot of conference calls and a lot of road time for Gloria in particular, going across that orange line, which is I-40, across the state. And we also have the convenience of meeting in Nashville. Many of our constituents and the state capital is in Nashville, but it's mutually inconvenient for people from Knoxville, Chattanooga, or Memphis. Next slide. That said, of course, the support of the higher education systems and the individuals at each of the institutions across the state has also been critical. When you saw the list of team members on the first slide, we didn't include a slew of other folks, usually 2 or 3 folks at each institution that have helped us with the technical and the policy implementation process. Next slide. Now I'm going to hand it over to Gloria Gammell, our evangelist for reverse transfer in the state of Tennessee and beyond. And Gloria is going to walk you through the process that was developed and implemented here. Gloria?
Thank you, India. I'm sure I've been called many more things in addition to an evangelist for reverse transfer as we have gone through the process. But I appreciate your time and attention. So real briefly, for us in Tennessee, we've defined it as a process that allows early transfer students to combine their 4-year college-level credits with their college-level community college credits to receive an associate degree. For us, potentially eligible students have to fall into the category of a transfer student currently enrolled in a participating 4-year institution. They have to meet the community college's residency requirement, which is a minimum of 15 college-level credits. And then for an associate degree, each student has to present a minimum of 60 combined college-level credits. Next slide, please. So for us, we were able, because we had such great support funding-wise from both Lumina and our state, we were able to really truly look at a semi-automated process where students would be able to opt in to that process for a simulated degree audit that would be run by the software system. It's semi-automatic in the sense that although the simulated degree audit is system run, we still rely on the community colleges to do a final check to make sure all degree requirements are in place, there are no outstanding parking tickets, and the community college is actually responsible for conferring that degree. We started out looking at what we call our Tennessee Transfer Pathway programs. Those are 40 associate degree programs with curriculum common across the state at the 13 community colleges. That seemed a smart place to start for those of us who don't work daily with students because, again, those curriculum are common across the state and were agreed upon quite some time ago. We also then listened up to the registrars who asked if we could also include an Associate of Arts or Associate of Science General. And that basically is the same set of general education requirements plus 19 college-level credits of almost anything for a general. Next slide. So one of the questions we're always asked is why did you go with an outside vendor? Why did you use technology? Not to sound flippant, but one of the main reasons was we had the money to be able to do that. We knew that we had the technical resources across the state to write the software in-house, but we also realized that those people had full-time jobs doing other things, and we were concerned that perhaps that might take a back seat given other things that might come up as a higher priority project. So by using an outside vendor, we had a very defined time for that vendor to develop the software, for us to run some pilot testing, and then implement it on a statewide scale. Another option that was fed into that was that all of our public institutions use the same student information system. India mentioned previously that it was nice to start out with a statewide system in that we used or involved public and private institutions. As you might imagine, the private institutions use a variety of student information systems. So having them involved right away when we began writing policy and looking at what we might need in terms of software, it was very important that we have the software developed that would work with more than one student information system. It's a very expedient system. The Academy One is able to run our simulated degree audits overnight. And when you think about each degree audit or each student who consents to participate has their course histories run against each of those 40 transfer pathways. So it's a phenomenal amount of data, and it really happens very quickly. Using the automated system also reduce the impact on the human resources, particularly there at the community colleges. Once we have the system up and running, it's very low maintenance. And most recently, Academy One, our vendor, did a return on investment study looking at the involvement of hours that it takes to process a degree audit manually, plus the factoring in the average salary of a graduation audit analyst here in Tennessee. And their research showed that there was a return on the investment of a little over $111,000 after one semester. So based on what their findings are, it's very cost-effective as well. So let's take a look at the next slide and begin looking at our transfer process. Actually, Jason, you can go on to the next one if you wouldn't mind. So now we're going to take a look at how Tennessee reverse transfer really works. As I mentioned before, it's a semi-automated process, and we use web services software that was developed by Academy One. It's institution initiated. The student does not have to start this process. We reach out to those eligible students. Consequently, it involves very little effort from those students who meet the eligibility criteria for a simulated degree audit. Next slide is our overall workflow process schematic, and I'm going to ask Tammy if she will walk you through that.
Thank you, Gloria. So when you look at this workflow process here, believe it or not, this is kind of a simplified version of our process. So I'll talk through some of the key points here and the key actions that happen in the course of this process. It actually starts with the four-year institutions, and they do a data upload of those students who are potentially eligible for the reverse transfer process. So if you think back to what Gloria said earlier, it's a semi-automated process whereby we're looking for students who have completed 15 credit hours at a community college and are a transfer student currently a transfer student at a four-year institution. So they're looking at their transfer students, and actually the threshold at this point in time we're looking at is students who have completed 12 credit hours or more at what we call the degree granting institution or the community college. So the first thing that they do is they provide us the eligible student list, their course inventory, and their course equivalencies for the current term. If nothing's changed in the course inventory or course equivalencies, those data files do not have to be provided again, just the eligible student list. Based on that student list, there's a notification that goes out to the students to ask them if they would like to participate in reverse transfer. If they say no, or if they don't respond, then if they say no or they don't respond for participating, they actually, when you look at the student opt-out, it's a student opt-out yes, they get a survey. If they don't respond, then after 14 days, it's an automatic opt-out and then a notification, that's made visible to the institution. If they choose to participate, then we look at that list of students, and the two-year institution actually then comes in and does their data uploads. They'll upload the same, basically, student list with information from the two-year institution. They've also, at this point in time, had the opportunity to upload their course inventories and their course equivalencies. And then they upload the student course history for those students that have opted in. At this stage, the four-year institutions also need to upload the student course history for the students. They can choose to upload them for all students if they would like that were potentially eligible, or just those that opted in. Once the course histories are uploaded, it runs through the automated or the simulated degree audit process, and it generates reports of the audit findings. What we're looking to do here is just to give the degree granting institution a list of students that appear to be close to having completed their degree, so they know which ones to go focus on. And for us, we really like to show where students have kind of fully met the degree requirements for a particular degree at the top of the list, and then it kind of filters down from there. We can choose to cut that off at a, that way that the degree granting institution can choose to cut that off at a point where it looks like students are getting too far away from being near completion to not invest their time. These degree granting institutions then take the course history information provided from the four-year institution, and they go back and audit and do the formal audit on each student that is close to determine if they have met the degree requirements officially. Are there any holds? Is there a reason why they can't get the degree? In some situations, based on policy, we've seen things like, since we set the filter at 12 credit hours from the degree granting institution, that student may have picked up another course that the four-year was not aware of, but they may not have. So they didn't meet the 15 credit hour policy requirement. It could be that the student also does not meet having had a 2.0 GPA to get the degree from the two-year institution. We've seen things like that as to reasons why they aren't awarded a degree even though they had enough credit hours for the degree. Otherwise, what we've predominantly seen is that the student just hasn't completed enough credit hours for the degree. Once that review cycle is done by the two-year degree granting institution, the final step is they come back into the RTS solution and they indicate what the outcome was. Did they get awarded a degree? Did they not? And at this point in time, the communication back to the student and the status of the audit and their findings is something that the two-year degree granting institution communicates to the students. So that's kind of the key points of the process and what it takes to get through the process with the simulated degree audit and reviews. And so, Jason, I think you can go to the next slide. And Gloria, I think you're taking back over from here, correct?
Correct. Thank you. So we really wanted to show you very quickly what an actual simulated degree audit looks like. And, of course, we blacked out the student's name, but this is an actual degree audit, simulated one that was run last semester. As you can see, gosh, I wish I had a pointer, but the first area of courses fall under general education requirements, and those circles that are half filled indicate that something is lacking in that area. And if you look under communication, you see that the student does have the green check marks by English Composition 1 and 2, but that speech requirement is missing. So the first thing that you'll see when you go through the simulated degree audit will be the areas of general education. Jason, if you could hit the next one. So wherever there is a check mark, something has been completed. And next slide. And you can see down at the bottom of this one, we've got areas of emphasis. And for this particular student, that would be their pre-health area. We don't really call it a major at the community college, but it would be those first and second year courses in preparation for a health science major at a four-year school. Again, so far the student is only missing that speech course. And Jason, if we go to the next slide. You'll see here at the bottom of the next slide, whoops, back one, please. The semi-automated or simulated degree audit will show the list of courses for which there was no exact match. And if you look at the very far column to the right, the last course is Speech 1010, where that student earned a grade of B. That speech course numbering is an older public speech class. And so that registrar was able to see that this student had in fact completed speech, was able to move that up to that blank area and the student was awarded the degree. So we did not load equivalency tables back to the 1900s. So this visual check that's able to be done by a campus registrar really works well for those students who may have had some older courses. So let's move on to our next slide, 2 slides. Take a look at our first semester, spring 2015. We had 7 public community colleges, 6 public universities, and 1 private college participating. We thought that if we implemented our statewide initiative in 2 phases, we might be able to better manage the amount of data and training for all of the schools across the state. So we actually phased it in 2 semesters. Next slide. We spent a fair amount of time marketing. As you can see on the next slide, we had a poster that we disseminated to the participating 4-year schools, because that notification from the reverse transfer system went to our potentially eligible students via an email, and they could actually opt in through that email. So we had a website, we created a logo. I spent, as India said, a lot of time traveling across the state, working with our 4-year campus advisors, because they were our best ambassadors. They were working directly with those potentially eligible students. We had press releases to our statewide media outlets, and we also developed separate press releases to go into the 4-year campus student newspapers. We also met on a very regular basis with registrars across the state. Next slide. So after all of that hard work, we actually had almost 6,000 students who had enough credits to be notified that they might be eligible for a reverse transfer degree. That number is a little high because it included some students that already had associate degree awards and some students who were at a participating Cycle 1 4-year school but had attended a community college that was not participating in that first cycle. So that number is a little high. We had almost 1,200 students who opted in, and out of that we were able to award 347 associate degrees. So when you adjust for the number of students who already had degrees or attended a school that wasn't yet in the mix, our opt-in rate actually was closer to 27%. But if you leave everybody in the mix, it was 20%. Next slide, please. So it's clear when you look at this slide, we only had 39 students out of almost 6,000 say they didn't want to participate. So it's clear to us that if we can get them to open the email, they will make a decision, and usually it's a positive decision on their behalf in that they want to participate. Next slide, please. So what we did find anecdotally, looking at why degrees were not awarded, as Tammy and India both have mentioned, they had the right numbers of credits, they just didn't fall into the right slots. Many already had earned an associate degree. And the number 3 David Letterman reason was they were lacking general education courses, 1 or more. So we learned a lot our very first semester. Next slide, Jason. So we will now take a look at what did we actually learn that first semester. India and I like to laugh that we thought it was going to be a much more simple process than it actually turned out to be. It was a very, very complex process to develop and implement. One of the things that I think we were fortunate with the amount of funding we had was that we were able to put me 100% as project coordinator, and we also had money to give a site stipend to one of our community college registrars to be a community college liaison. And if you have the money and you haven't done this, I would really recommend dedicating some staff to oversee this. Our registrars and graduation audit analysts, as well as our IT people, were just invaluable as we started developing the process and policies, making sure that we kept it student-centered focus. Those are the folks who helped us get to where we are at this point. We also came up with some pretty obvious refinements we needed to put in place for the next semester, and over, it was so clear that the communication between the users, the team, and the vendors were essential to move this process along and develop improvements. Next slide, please. We learned more. We learned retrospectively that starting out with as many institutions as we did was really too many, and we didn't always have a four-year school that was matched with its feeder community college. So we had some students who wanted to participate, but their community college was not yet on board. So now that we have all the schools involved, things are humming along much more smoothly. Next cycle. So on our next slide, again, our opt-in rate was a little lower than we had hoped, but we certainly are very satisfied with the numbers that we got. We have developed a more aggressive statewide marketing campaign. We're doing more reach outs to students to educate them about the value of the associate degree. And we're looking at ways that might allow students to opt in differently or in addition to that process through the emails that they get. Next slide, please. We were very, very lucky in that our governor, Governor Haslam, is a champion for higher education across the state and was willing and did make 2 videos for us to promote the value of the associate degree, as well as encouraging students to opt into this process. So we had one embedded in a student email, and then the second one is on our reverse transfer website. Next slide. Some of the things that we learned, and this is a good housekeeping exercise for advisors and records offices, some of the four-year schools didn't always record the fact that a transfer student had earned an associate degree, so they were picked up in the mix. And we also learned that a lot of times students just think that somehow by osmosis that the community college will know that they're going to be attending a four-year school the next semester, and in fact they did not make arrangements to get that final transcript sent to the four-year school. So we're doing some in-house things to upload only students who have not received an associate degree, and are also going back to our 2- and 4-year schools to help them better educate students about paperwork they need to get in place to transfer. Next slide, please. We also learned that although we thought we were very smart, starting out with our common curricula transfer pathways, those aren't always the routes that the students elect to take. So again, now this is another opportunity to better educate students about the value of those transfer pathways, that they will position them to be closer to degree completion and so forth. We also will be adding additional associate degree programs to our bank of courses and programs that are involved in the simulated degree audit. Next slide. One of the best things that we learned was that the software functionality worked just as it was designed. And there was a collective sigh across the state of Tennessee, and probably in Pennsylvania, where Academy One is located. We do have several enhancements that we are planning to put in place next semester and thereafter. Again, to modify the opt-in and file uploading processes. Trying to figure out different ways to simplify the audit process for the community college, including what the student's four-year major is, if they have a 2.0 at the community college, and so forth. We are also at the state level looking at an electronic transcript exchange. Most of the school's records offices do want a real transcript to verify and confirm that the student did take courses at other institutions. We're also looking at ways that we can better communicate with the students through the reverse transfer system about their outcomes. Next slide. As we worked with Academy One, we also learned things. We know now that, and we did this from the very beginning, regular communication with the core team. We have weekly phone calls with Academy One's team. Those have been extremely beneficial. We also have had a lead negotiator to negotiate contracting, technical issues, and that, fortunately, is not me. As the project coordinator, I started out kind of being the herder of cats, but I am not the negotiator in terms of hammering out contract things with the vendor. Project development is very, very technical, and we have Tammy Lemon on our team, who is our technical person and understands that technical language that India and I do not. So it's been very, very good to have key players in key roles. We did implement a pilot test this summer using real students to test the functionality of the software system. So if I had to sum up working with a vendor in 4 words, I would say communication, documentation, negotiation, and compromise. Next slide, please. As India and I quickly found out, let's see, I think we're ahead of ourselves, Jason, but that's okay. We are going to be looking at gaps. Okay, one more slide. There we go. Yeah, we will be looking at gaps in the degree requirements when we can drill down into the data a little deeper. We are adding all associate degree options and are expanding the course equivalencies, looking at ways to include more substitutions so that more students are eligible without compromising the integrity of the degree. Next slide, please. I think as all of us can attest, the degree review workload was really higher than we anticipated. There's a lot of data for the graduation audit analyst to consider, and we have, again, moved up our cycles for this next cycle, moved up the timeline so that there will be more work weeks for the graduation audit analyst to look at those simulated degree audits and make those official degree award decisions. We have also looked at perhaps having a central screening support that could call through many of the simulated degree audits and flag those that seem to be most viable for degree award. Next slide. As I mentioned before, most of the schools would still like to have a transcript in some fashion. So we are looking at ways to accommodate those needs. We also work very closely with a group of registrars in between cycles to refine the language in the opt-in statements that would allow community colleges even to go back and reach out to get a high school transcript for that particular student. We have revised some of our policy issues, and again, we are still trying to get that statewide transcript exchange in place. Next slide. So we've talked a lot about all the technical things, policy, but I think the very best thing was I was able to contact one student directly and tell her that she was awarded the associate degree. She was an adult learner, had never thought about college until she was 32, and she cried. She was so excited and was thrilled with the role modeling she was going to be able to do for her children. Now, next slide, please. Take a quick look at where we are for fall. Again, next slide, we have all of our state schools and 6 private universities and colleges involved. Next slide. With our timeline, we have started the cycle in July. We're now in October. The community colleges are reviewing those simulated degree audits and will be awarding degrees in December. Next slide. For the opt-ins this cycle, we had over 7,500 students were identified as potentially eligible. We opted in almost 1,800, 57, only 1% opted out. So we're pretty consistent with those who opt out. Obviously, we need to do more education to get people to respond. Next slide, please.
Gloria, we're going to go from here to questions. There are a number of questions rolling in, and
okay, thank you.
Some of the questions that have come up will point us to cover the few things that we're already targeting for what's next. But Jason, do you want to relay some of the questions that have come through?
Sure, yes, thanks. Let me just first thank our Tennessee colleagues for sort of going pretty deep here into their experience. We do have several questions, so I think we can get through most of these. So we have a question about the Tennessee transfer pathways. I wonder, India, if you could there's a question about what do those look like, or do those pathways include upper and lower division courses, and are those pathways common across the state? And related, there's another question that I'll just add on here is, what are the most common pathways where you see reverse transfer degrees being awarded?
Thanks. Those are certainly core questions to how we started. The Tennessee UT system and TBR system have worked really hard and continue to add very specific transfer pathways for students who are planning to go to a 2-year school, earn a degree, and move forward. So they are common across all the community colleges in the state, and if a student has completed the pathway or a cluster within that pathway, it is guaranteed acceptance to a 4-year school in the state. So they do include upper and lower level courses at the community college level. The second question related to what the most common pathways are for reverse transfer, and Gloria may need to help me out here, but they are probably what you would expect. Business administration is fairly common. Certainly our most common degree at this point is a general studies degree for reverse transfer award. Gloria, do you remember any of the other real common ones?
Psychology was in there, but predominantly business administration, accounting, and psychology, but definitely the general, which means they're not really following particular pathways.
Right, and one of our strategies for managing that is now to add all of the different degree options and elective sort of concentration options or focus options that are at the community colleges to our simulated degree audit software. So within about 6 months to a year, we should have the ability to test the student against other pathways other than the transfer pathways.
Great. Yeah, that's very helpful, and the policy context around transfer pathways is an important element of your process. Another question that we sort of hear a lot across states is related to consent. And Gloria, you mentioned, I'll pose this to Gloria or India, but Gloria mentioned you're considering additional opt-in options for consent, and there's a question about sort of what your consent options might look like in the future.
I can tackle, or
go ahead.
Gloria, you want to go ahead?
Sure. We are looking more, we're pretty satisfied with the language that we've used, and that is very definitely FERPA compliant. We're looking at the potential of adding that consent onto a transfer application. So as the student is applying as a transfer student to a four-year school, they could consent right then to participate in reverse transfer. We'd like to be able to send things out using Twitter, different modalities that more and more students seem to be leaning towards. We could also have them opt in at orientation as a new transfer student at a four-year university. We're just trying to pick out key times where it's going to be relevant to that student and an easy process for that student. India, do you have anything else to add to that?
Thanks. No, that's exactly what we're thinking. The only thing I'll add is that we certainly have seen states that have opt-out options, and that gives you a much better default opt-in rate, of course. In the state of Tennessee, the notion of opting out is probably not as palatable to either our policymakers or our institutions at this point. So I think we're still going to be looking at a hopefully at-transfer opt-in process.
Thanks for sharing that, and I'll just note that there are a number of other credit when it's due states that are pursuing integrating this consent into the transfer application, either when the student applies to the university as a transfer student or when the student at the community college has their transcripts sent to a university. So there are a few different models, but I think there is a trend toward that model. So here's another question, a couple of questions about the details of your eligibility criteria. One was about the GPA requirement, and is there a requirement, a GPA requirement at the community college and at the four-year institution, or one or the other?
That is a requirement for the degree at the community college level, so there's not a GPA requirement at the four-year level.
Okay, thanks. We have a question about, you shared a lot about your outreach that you've done to students, one question is how, Gloria, you sort of provided some student feedback. Is that feedback sort of typical of what you've heard from other students who have received a degree? And there's also a question about, if your marketing materials are available to be shared. And I'll just note that we have on the OCCRL website a place to put some of that information. So there is some information up there already, but is there another venue for sharing some of your marketing and outreach materials?
Yes, actually on our website, which is tnreversetransfer.org, all one word, .org, we do have under the frequently asked questions for advisors and registrars, we have a toolkit there for the campuses, so people are very welcome to take a look at that. For the most part, the students that I've had contact with, they've been very, very positive about the opportunity to get an associate degree, particularly the adult learners. They immediately see the value of that ability to stack credentials. For the traditional age student, we're trying to impress upon them that life happens even to 20-year-olds, and if they would have to stop out of school for a while, they would have that credential. And it's something that they've already earned and paid for, so why wouldn't they take it? And I think we're beginning to get that message across. I had one student call me on my office phone after he got the email with the governor's message in it, and he said, you know, I figure if the governor says it's a good thing, it's got to be. So, you know, it's interesting what taps into somebody's interest level and gets them to buy into it.
Great. Thanks. And, you know, there were there were a couple questions sort of related and about what percentage of students who get the reverse transfer associate's degree go on to get their bachelor's degree, and what percentage drop out. And I'll just, I'm assuming in Tennessee it's a little early to answer that question because you've just awarded these degrees. We, OCCRL is working with several of the states who started reverse transfer a couple of years ago, and degrees that were awarded a couple of years ago, and we're tracking those students' progress towards a baccalaureate degree. We have some initial data that suggests I guess they suggest that students aren't sort of dropping out in mass quantities, but we really need a couple more years to track students' progress toward the baccalaureate degree. But we will have some initial data that is reported over the next few months that will answer some of those questions. So stay tuned for that. Let me pose a question here to India. So you all, Tennessee shared how through reverse transfer, you're awarding associate's degrees to more students who, as Gloria mentioned, have earned those credits and earned those degrees. But there's a question about sort of how reverse transfer has your work with reverse transfer has influenced some of your other work that you're doing in the state, and whether that be on, for example, students who have stopped out of a 2-year or 4-year school, or other student populations. I'm wondering if you can sort of speak to that idea.
Absolutely. A couple of things have happened. One, the work on reverse transfer has really solidified a network of people at all the institutions in the state that are working together on multiple initiatives. One of them is just that, to reach out to adults who have stopped out and to bring them back to complete an associate, either a certificate, associate degree, or beyond. We're very interested in using the tools that Academy One has built to try to help with that process, and we're also building a portal, student-facing portal, that some states also have, that allows a student to go in and play around with their credits and see how they would transfer, or how they would still be useful for a degree anywhere in the state. So the two things that have been direct extensions of this have been this notion of now working on forward transfer and completion of stopped out adults, and two, just working together all across the state, and public and private, to make things like that portal and things like the transcript solution work for everyone.
Great, thanks. I think we're nearing the end of our time here, but we have one more question here, and I think maybe this is a question for Gloria. The question is, how do the community colleges verify that the associate's degree is completed after the simulated degree audit?
They actually go through, like that sample one I showed, that's what the community college gets, and they go through that. Oftentimes they will want a hard copy transcript, whether it's PDF file or whatever, from the 4-year school, so that they do have that in their records for that student should they ever be audited. So that's the primary impetus behind us trying to come up with a statewide electronic transcript exchange. Excuse me. Did that get at the question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the only other thing I would mention is that it's actually the community college that's taking the action to decide if a student gets a degree. So the simulated audits, the semi-automated solution does not award a degree. The community college makes that final determination. They may even run things through their own degree audit system if they choose to for students that look close, and then they record the degree as being earned.
Okay, thank you. So there is a verification process that the community college engages in, and that it sounds like that may look different depending on the institution, on the community college.
A little bit. The verification is their very own. It's they're making the actual degree award.
Okay. Well, we've reached the end of our webinar, and I'd just like to take a moment to thank India, Gloria, and Tammy for their time and their commitment to this work, and thank you for sharing what you've learned through your reverse transfer experience. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this webinar is being recorded, so we will post this webinar to the OCCRL website and disseminate it via email in a few days after we've had time to process the video. So with that, you'll see on your screen that our next webinar is on November 19th at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and this webinar will feature the state of Hawaii, and Gary Rodwell from Hawaii will be presenting. So I think this is, 8 or 9 a.m. Hawaii time, so it'll be bright and early in the morning for Gary. So we welcome you to join us for that webinar and look forward to learning more about Hawaii's work on November 9th. So thank you all, and have a good day.